we're back, and we're talking about idolatry and why it is that we continue in our society to turn a blind eye to the child abuse in the institutions that we love. We're talking about Penn State, of course, and that situation, and so many people that love and adore that program to the point that they want to see it continue. In spite of the fact that so many children have been harmed in the process. And we're talking about the Catholic Church in the same way so many people that would seem to be good people at heart. And this doesn't just apply to Catholics, you guys. We've been talking about abuse in the Southern Baptist Church denomination where they do the same thing. They pass their guilty pastors around and cover up for them. So don't think that this is a Protestant Catholic issue. We're talking about Catholics today because of the fact that in Pennsylvania, this Monsignor just got 3 to 6 years in this sex abuse case for covering up for a guilty priest and not reporting sex abuse cases. So why is it that we're willing to continue to place our children in a position where they will look up to these figures that we know are involved in institutions that are riddled with this sin, that are really infected through and through? Why do we turn a blind eye to that and even place our children in that kind of danger?
Could we look at a little history?
Yeah, I'd love to, Gary.
The Catholic Church has had a history that goes back to the 1950s and before probably, but it's well established that in the 1950s that pedophile priests were there were enough of them that there was a priest whose name was Gerald Fitzgerald. And Gerald Fitzgerald, he founded an order to treat these pedophile priests. Now, if you're going to found an order to treat pedophile priests, I'd say there's a problem, wouldn't you?
Yes, an epidemic.
An epidemic.
Yes.
And he described it as such. He described it in a way that after a while, what he figured out was they can't be treated.
That was his conclusion?
That was his conclusion. They need to be removed and put back into the general population. The only person that can practice pedophilia and not get arrested is in the Catholic Church.
Was that what he said?
That's what he said. Now, where do you think the pedophiles would go?
Well, obviously, if you're a pedophile, the safest place to practice your pedophilia, one of the safest places, is going to be in the Catholic Church, because classically, these priests have been very protected. What year was this, Gary?
Well, in 1952 and in 1957, he issued a warning to the bishops, actually. But he knew the problem. He wrote to certain bishops and priests in 1952, but he issued a very strong warning in 1957 to the bishops. And they knew that this was going on in 1957, and he warned them about the epidemic. He warned them about the fact that these men could not be treated, in his opinion. And he is and was their expert.
Right.
He is the person that they sent their problems to.
So he would be the one with the information. Did they take his recommendation? I
don't believe they did. Evidence shows that they continue to have issues, and currently, even this week it was announced that there was still the Monsignor who was sentenced to prison. Interestingly enough, there's a bishop in Kansas City that is going to trial.
That's right.
And
that's going to be this fall,
and that's
right?
going to be in September. There's a priest that he's accused of covering up that goes to trial in August. And it was also announced this week that the priest whose trial will be in August from North Kansas City, the Northland area, they have discovered what they believe to be evidence of a number of crimes that he has not been charged with. So we have a situation here in August where there may be possibly additional charges against this priest, and that may even escalate the fate of the bishop who is going to trial for covering up for this priest.
Didn't he send him on to another
He passed
place
him on to another parish, another congregation, another group of people.
After discovering his issue?
Yes, it was discovered that he had a problem. And even with that problem, they sent him on. And in fairness, this man has a trial to go through. And that means he's not convicted. I'm talking about the bishop. He has not been convicted yet. He's in a position where he's going to be tried, though, by civil authorities. But the one thing I can tell you is that the problem was established and known. The epidemic was known back in the 1950s. And we see it continuing today. Why is it? Why have we been unable, as a society, to get rid of this problem?
Well, there are two issues here. One is an inability to see clearly, or an unwillingness to see clearly, the fact that if you have an organization, an institution, a tradition that is steeped in this kind of sin, that it never happens in a vacuum. It's very obvious in both of these cases, actually, that it's epidemic, but especially the Catholic Church, that it's been going on for such a long time and that it's so deep-rooted that it's really, folly to try to pretend that it's not, soaked into the whole organization. Jesus said that a little bit of yeast, it's going to leaven the whole lump of dough. If it's the yeast of the Pharisees, it's going to spread throughout the whole thing. That sin is going to spoil everything that it touches, that allows it to continue. And so you can't have this kind of horror going on and people knowing about it and covering it up without it, just really permeating the entire institution. And so to turn a blind eye to that's part of the problem, that people don't face the fact that they say, but there's so much good that they do. But you see, if it's you that's being raped as a child, all of that good that is done, it really doesn't amount to a hill of beans, because what these people are doing is putting out their good deeds for a show. And I'm sorry if you're involved in the Catholic Church and you have a good heart. God does have a solution for you, and we're going to talk about that solution from the Scriptures, okay? There are people in the Catholic Church with good hearts. I know this because my grandmother was one of them. And so, we do know that God does have a solution for you, but the solution is not to continue to fund the people who are raping our children. And as this judge found, what she said to this Monsignor was that he enabled monsters in clerical garb to destroy the souls of children. Now, these people, if anything, should be held to a higher standard. In civil court, as well, they should be held to a high standard because of the fact that they do come in the name of God, and people trust them because of that. When you misuse that name, when you misuse that trust, that makes your crime all the worse. And so you ask the question, why is it that this continues and has continued for so long? And what I was saying is that, first of all, it's because people have a hard time coming to grips with the fact that when you have such an epidemic, when you have so many victims in an organization and an institution, and so many people who are aware of the problem and do not, bring the perpetrators to justice, and they let it continue. When you have that going on, the entire organization is going to be tainted. It's going to be defiled. It's filled with this sin, and it cannot, as this priest found with a pedophile priest, it cannot be remedied. It cannot be fixed. It has to be torn down. It cannot, be rehabilitated, so to speak.
It's been more than 60 years since the officials that are making decisions have known and had this warning from this Gerald Fitzgerald, this priest Gerald Fitzgerald. And it was at that point in time that they had already recognized it as a problem. Right. In all of those years, they have not been able to remove the problem, correct the problem, and even as of the amount of damages, the civil penalties, the court awards to the victims have gone to $3 billion, and that's in the United States alone. With a B, and that's a lot of money. But this week it was $60 million that the NCAA president fined Penn State, $60 million. And a lot of the people that we're reading have said that's a lot of money. They're worried about it. He established some sanctions against them for their program, putting some handcuffs on them, so to speak, to cause them to not be able to recruit as easily. And they have forfeited their previous history of winnings and, all sorts of this type of thing. The question I would have is that going to stop? Is that going to halt? Is that going to bring to an end the practice of pedophilia at Penn State?
Let's make this clear. No amount of money to the victims will repair the damage that has been done. Let's start there.
Good place to start.
Yeah. And then, so you have to ask, what is the goal of imposing these penalties and these fines? You cannot make good on what these people did. You should pay the victims money, and a lot of it. It's still not going to heal the wounds. So the goal of the penalties, if it's not to stop the abuse.
Is to continue the abuse.
So
let me explain. They also lost a sponsor this week, a financial sponsor, an advertising sponsor for their sports program, State Farm. They probably will lose some more. Time comes, time goes, sponsors come, sponsors go. You know how it goes. This is part of business.
It has been reported as if it's some kind of stiff penalty in some place.
Oh, certainly. Some people think it's a very stiff penalty. And if you go to, I think it was reported on the campus that the students' jaws dropped in the student union. And that's fine. I understand that to some people, $60 million would be a lot of money, and if it were in your pocket, you'd probably think it was a lot of money too. But here is the truth. From 1996 to 2003, a 7-year period, Penn State raised for their endowment fund $1.37 billion.
When?
$1.37 billion.
Billion with a B.
With a B.
So how long would it take on that much money just accumulating interest to...
Interest would pay the $60 million within a year, but just doing another fundraising campaign, they could probably raise money out 2, 3, 4 months, tops.
2, 3, 4 months. This is a slap on the hand. Don't be fooled, you guys. Don't be fooled. And the important thing to understand is that until those showers where the abuse happens, until at least those are shut down, okay, and they're no longer available for abuse will continue in those showers. Gary, I think that on the doors of every Catholic church and on the doors of those showers, they should have to have a big sign up that says, this many victims abused here, and just have a rolling count before people go into the doors so that they know what they're doing. Because I think there are a lot of people out there who go in blindly trusting and who would never place their children in that position if they knew that it meant that their child was going to
I don't believe they would. I don't believe people would naturally place their children into a position of harm. However, as a society, we have come from trying to treat the people with the problem, as the Catholic Church did in the 40s and 50s, the late 40s and early and throughout the 50s. I would have to say an effort to treat it and to address it is a good thing. Okay?
Right.
I don't have a problem with trying to address the issue. But if it doesn't work, it's a bad thing. And if the bishops that are not going to, yes, we're flipping back and forth from Penn State to the Catholic Church, and it could be the Southern Baptist Church or any church, really. This is a society issue.
Right.
And one of the big issues is, from that point of view in the 50s, they moved on to ignoring the warnings of the people that were running the program. And why would they ignore the warnings that these priests cannot be treated? There was not a successful treatment rate.
Because the whole tree is bad, from the roots up. You guys, let me give you a reality check. For those of you regular people out there who find it to be abhorrent to think about a child being abused in this way, it's not something that's acceptable. If you find out that a child that you know is being abused in that way, it turns your stomach. It's not something that you try to justify. It's something that you try to stop. But it is the people who have been desensitized to this behavior that think that it's normal behavior. And when you're surrounded by it all the time, you guys, your mind gets perverted. When you're in a pool of people where you have a large percentage of those people who practice these things, as in the Catholic Church, your peer group, in the Penn State situation, where you have people that you respect doing these things, your mind becomes perverted, and people do not know right from wrong anymore. And oftentimes, a person that's covering up for someone's crime is also someone who is guilty of the same crime. To a person who is not guilty, it is something that is going to keep them up at night. To a person who is guilty of the same crime, they're not really going to see any problem except, how do we get out of this?
So now here we are 50 years later, and in 2012, society has come around to the point where society is saying, if you know about it and you didn't turn it in, you didn't report it, and you were responsible for hiring these people, then you're guilty and you go to prison too.
That's the right direction to go.
So things are heading in the right direction.
Yeah, and that is the right direction to go, and it's a spiritual war that's happening right now. I'm encouraged to see that there is a move in our society to go that direction, because that's actually God's direction. But there is a spiritual war, and it's going to be over our children. And it is what we find when we look back at God's history, both with pagan nations and with the nation of Israel, his own people, is that God will put up with a lot of sin. He'll put up with a lot of rebellion. He's very patient. He's slow to anger. He will put up with it for many years, not because he's not just, but because he's merciful, and he wants to give people a chance to repent. But historically, we see that the place that he draws his line is when people begin to sacrifice their children on the altars of their idols. Human sacrifice. And when that happens, God draws his line, and that's when judgment happens. Now, there are a lot of voices out there saying judgment is going to happen for America. Any nation that engages in these practices, those practices will come to an end. God will put that nation to an end. And we've seen it historically over and over and over again. We've seen it prophesied about different nations, including Israel, in the Old Testament than we've seen in history. Those prophecies come to pass. God is not idle in his words. He's patient with us. But we need to have a fear of the Lord and understand that if we will not stand up for our children, then God will eventually do that. And when he does that, he has to take drastic measures because just like with the Catholic Church or with Penn State, whenever an institution becomes defiled by this and infiltrated by it and completely infected, also our society will become desensitized to this and continue to allow it to happen if there's not a push in the other direction to say no.
I want to be clear that with Penn State, the financial damage was just a drop in the bucket.
Drop in the bucket.
It means nothing, absolutely nothing.
Anything.
In 1967, they received a $50 million gift. 1967.
How much would that be worth today?
Oh, who knows? But a lot more than, the bottom line is they are used to dealing with big amounts of money. For them to get hit with $60 million, I know $60 million to some people seems like a lot. And today, the very first civil suit was filed against Penn State as well. So there will be civil suits, and there will, they'll lose some sponsorships, and they will have a program. Well, that's the point. The shower stalls will be open.
The shower stalls are open for business, ladies and gentlemen, and they will continue to be open for business. And according to Jesus, this is how it works. He said, make a tree good, and its fruit will be good, or make a tree bad, and its fruit will be bad, for a tree is recognized by its fruit. And then it goes on to say, I'm going to read it, you brood of vipers. By the way, who is Jesus talking to here, Gary? He's talking to the brood of vipers. Aren't those the religious leaders?
The leadership.
You brood of vipers, how can you who are evil say anything good? For out of the overflow of the heart the mouth speaks. The good man brings good things out of the good stored up in him, and the evil man brings evil things out of the evil stored up in him. But I tell you that men will have to give account on the day of judgment for every careless word they have spoken. Okay, so when you hear officials of institutions like this speaking in such a way as to put on a false mask of contrition, but to also make excuses and to try to paint the rest of the tree as good. Look, if the fruit is bad, you guys, if the fruit is sexual abuse of children, that means the whole tree is bad, unless Jesus doesn't know what he's talking about. And these are the people who say that their authority is based upon the authority of Jesus Christ. So if they're not going to submit to his wisdom, then they are coming under false pretenses, and they're coming for your children. I want to read one other scripture because it talks about turning a blind eye to this kind of thing. It's talking about any Israelite or foreigner who sacrifices his child to Moloch. That's not acceptable. It's going to be punished. And it says, I myself will set my face against that man and cut him off from the midst of his people, because he has given some of his children to Moloch and thereby defiled my sanctuary and profaned my holy name. Now understand, God's solution, cut him off. Don't have anything to do with them, okay? Not rehabilitate them, put them in a position of power. Cut them off, okay? He goes on to say, if, however, the people of the land shut their eyes to that man when he gives some of his children to Molech, so that they do not put him to death, I myself will set my face against that man and his clan. I will cut off from the midst of their people both him and all who follow after him in spiritual prostitution to commit prostitution by worshiping Molech. Okay, he's saying if you turn a blind eye, if you don't cut this guy off, Okay, now we don't stone people. Jesus gave us a new command to love one another, but we are to cut this off, and we are not to allow people to continue in this sin. Anybody else, if you're not a priest, Gary, and you rape a little boy, what happens to you?
You go to prison.
You go to prison. You certainly do not remain in a position of honor and authority in the community where people can call your name good and more children can become victim, okay? But God says he will also set his face against the people, the citizens who turn a blind eye. And that is you and I, you guys. We cannot allow this anymore. And your attitudes matter. When you have an attitude of, oh, well, I just hate to see this institution, this football institution fall. I want you to imagine your little boy, your little girl being abused by one of these people. Imagine that little face crying and screaming and growing up with that pain. What kind of parent wouldn't want to see that razed to the ground? That's what needs to happen. And that's how God handles it. When he says you're liable for punishment, you guys have to understand, if we don't take the right actions, God will take those actions. And he has given it to us to move in the right direction. But his direction is that you have to get rid of those institutions. Even his own temple, he didn't spare, Gary.
That's right.
Whenever he said his own temple was defiled by these things, what did he do to his temple? He completely destroyed it, okay? Completely destroyed it and moved the people out and sent them into captivity. He did it more than once, okay? There is nothing so holy to God. Even his own temple, even the institutions that he set up, even the priesthood that he ordained, there is nothing so holy and important to God as an innocent child.